This is Earth, but not the one you know. A world where America was never discovered. No United States, no world wars as we know them, no global superpower shaping the future. Because in this timeline, Christopher Columbus never reached the New World. And one small moment changed everything. The question is, what would our world look like today if America never existed? In the year 1492, a man set sail into the unknown. His name was Christopher Columbus. His mission was simple: find a new route to Asia. But what he was about to encounter would change the course of human history forever, at least in our timeline. Because when Columbus and his crew crossed the Atlantic Ocean, they didn't find Asia. They found something no European had ever truly understood before. An entire world untouched by them. A world filled with vast lands, unknown civilizations, and endless possibilities. And from that moment on, everything changed. Empires rose, nations were born, and eventually the United States of America came into existence. But history is not as stable as we think. It's not a fixed path. It's a fragile chain of events held together by decisions, chance, and luck. Because the truth is, Columbus almost didn't make it. His journey was filled with uncertainty. His crew was afraid, supplies were limited, and the ocean ahead seemed endless. There were moments when the men demanded to turn back. Moments when fear almost overcame ambition. Moments where one decision could have ended the journey entirely. So now, imagine this. What if those moments went differently? What if the fear was stronger? What if the crew refused to go any further? What if Columbus was forced to turn his ships around and return to Spain, empty-handed? No discovery, no new world, no history as we know it. Because without that single event, the Americas remain hidden, not lost, not destroyed, but simply undiscovered. For years, for decades, maybe even for centuries. And while Europe continues forward, believing the world is smaller than it truly is, an entire half of the planet waits in silence, unknown, unseen, and untouched. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Because if America was never discovered, it wouldn't just change one country, it would change everything. In this timeline, Columbus never reaches the New World. His ships return to Spain with nothing but failure. No discovery, no headlines, no reason for Europe to believe there is anything beyond the Atlantic worth chasing. And so, the ocean remains what it had always been, a vast, terrifying barrier. Not a bridge, not an opportunity, but a limit. And because of that, everything slows down. You see, in our timeline, the discovery of the Americas triggered something massive, a race between empires, Spain, Portugal, Britain, France, all competing for land, wealth, and power. But in this world, that race never begins. There is no new world to conquer, no endless lands waiting to be claimed. no rivers of gold and silver flowing back into Europe. So instead of expanding outward, Europe turns inward. Nations focus on their own borders. Conflicts remain local. Progress becomes slower, more controlled, more limited. And across the Atlantic, something extraordinary continues in silence. Two massive continents, North America and South America, remain completely untouched by European influence. No colonization, no foreign empires, no sudden collapse of native civilizations. The Aztecs, the Incas, and countless other indigenous societies continue to grow, to evolve, to develop on their own terms. Their cultures deepen, their technologies advance in their own direction. Their histories remain interrupted. For the first time in human history, an entire half of the planet is developing completely separately from the rest of the world. No interference, no invasion, no global connection. And this creates something humanity has never experienced before. Two completely different versions of civilization existing at the same time, on the same planet, but completely unaware of each other. And while that might sound peaceful, it comes with consequences. Because the connection between continents is what accelerated human progress. The exchange of ideas, the exchange of resources, the exchange of knowledge. Without it, innovation slows, discovery slows, the world becomes smaller, not physically, but intellectually. Because without America, there is no massive transfer of crops like potatoes and corn to Europe, no agricultural revolution, no rapid growth of cities. Entire economies remain weaker, food remains limited, life remains harder. And slowly, without anyone realizing it, the world begins to fall behind. Not into chaos, not into destruction, but into something far more subtle: stagnation, a quiet, invisible slowing of progress. And the most fascinating part? No one knows it, because no one knows what's missing. Because across the ocean, beyond the horizon, an entire world still exists, full of potential, full of resources, full of possibilities that could change everything. But in this timeline, it remains hidden. And as years turn into decades, and decades into centuries, the question becomes even more dangerous. If the world never discovers America, will it ever reach its full potential? Or will humanity remain divided forever? At first, the absence of America doesn't seem like a disaster. Europe continues forward. Kingdoms rise and fall. Wars are fought. Borders shift. Life goes on. But beneath the surface, something critical is missing. Because in our timeline, the discovery of the Americas didn't just add land to maps, it injected Europe with unimaginable wealth. Gold, silver, resources beyond anything the continent had ever seen. And that wealth changed everything. It funded empires, it built navies, it powered revolutions. It turned small kingdoms into global superpowers. But in this timeline, that wealth never arrives. Spain never becomes the dominant force of the 16th century. Without the riches of the New World, its rise is slower, weaker, less influential. The Spanish Empire, as we know it, never truly exists. And Britain never becomes the empire that rules the seas, because without colonies in North America, there is no foundation for global expansion, no vast territories to control, no economic advantage to dominate the world. Instead of rising above others, Britain remains just one power among many, equal, limited, contained. And this creates a completely different Europe. A Europe where no single nation can dominate. A Europe where power is constantly shifting, but never truly concentrated. Wars still happen, but they don't lead to global control. There is no overwhelming victor, no defining empire, only a balance that never fully breaks. And at first glance, that might seem like a good thing. Less domination, less colonial destruction, less global exploitation. But there's another side to this, because competition is what drives progress. In our timeline, European powers raced against each other to explore, to conquer, to innovate, to become stronger than their rivals. But in this world, that pressure is weaker. The urgency is gone. There is no new world to fight over, no massive prize waiting across the ocean. So ambition fades, exploration slows, innovation becomes less aggressive. And over time, Europe begins to fall into something dangerous. Not chaos, not collapse, but complacency. A quiet acceptance of limits, a world where nations stop pushing beyond what they already know. And this has consequences far beyond politics, because without expansion, there's less cultural exchange, less scientific collaboration, less technological advancement. The Renaissance still happens, but its impact is smaller. The Industrial Revolution comes later, and when it does, it spreads more slowly. The world does not accelerate. It drifts, slowly, quietly, into a version of history that feels incomplete. And the most unsettling part? No one realizes it, because to them, this is normal. This is how the world has always been. A world of limits, a world without discovery, a world that never reached its full potential. And all of it because one journey never succeeded. By now, the world has already changed in ways most people would never notice. Empires are weaker, progress is slower, connections between continents don't exist. But this is where everything truly begins to break apart. Because in this timeline, there is no United States of America, no revolution, no declaration of independence, no moment where a group of colonies rises up and creates something entirely new, a nation built on an idea, freedom, opportunity, self-governance. In our world, that idea didn't just create a country, it reshaped the future. But here, that moment never happens, because the land where it would have taken place remains undiscovered, unclaimed, unknown. There are no 13 colonies, no struggle against a distant empire, no founding fathers, no constitution. And without that foundation, the ripple effects begin. Because the United States was never just a country, it became a force, a cultural, economic, and political engine that influenced nearly every part of the modern world. Without it, there is no global superpower to rise in the 20th century, no nation strong enough to dominate economically, no unified force capable of shaping international systems. Instead, power remains scattered, divided between smaller nations. none of them strong enough to lead, none of them powerful enough to stabilize the world. And without a dominant force, the idea of global leadership disappears. There is no one to step in during crises, no one to influence outcomes on a massive scale, no one to define what the future should look like. And this changes something even deeper, the spread of ideas. Because the United States didn't just export power, it exported beliefs, democracy, individual freedom, the idea that people could shape their own destiny. Without that influence, those ideas spread more slowly. In some places, they never take hold at all, because there is no powerful example proving that such a system can succeed, no visible model for the rest of the world to follow. And as a result, different systems rise instead: stronger control, more centralized power, less emphasis on individual rights, not everywhere, but in enough places to change the direction of history. And then there's culture, because without the United States, there is no global cultural center, no Hollywood shaping entertainment across the world, no music industry dominating global trends, no shared media connecting billions of people through stories, films, and ideas. The world becomes more fragmented, more regional, less connected. Different cultures grow, but they remain separate, isolated, without a single force bringing them together. And perhaps the most profound change of all is something people rarely think about: opportunity. Because in our world, for millions of people, the United States represented something more than just a country. It represented a possibility, a place where lives could change, where people could start over, where ambition could turn into reality. But in this timeline, that idea never exists. There is no American dream, no symbol of limitless opportunity. And without that symbol, something subtle begins to fade, the belief that something better is always possible. And slowly, without anyone noticing, the world becomes a place where limits feel permanent, where possibilities feel smaller, where the future feels less open. And all of it because a nation that was supposed to exist never did. By the early 20th century, the world is already unstable. Tensions are rising, alliances are forming, nations are competing for power, resources, and influence, and eventually, war becomes inevitable. In our timeline, this led to World War I, a conflict so massive it reshaped the entire planet. But in this world, something is different, because without the United States, there's no external force powerful enough to tip the balance. When war breaks out in Europe, it stays in Europe. The fighting is brutal, relentless, endless. Millions of soldiers are sent into battle. Trenches stretch across entire countries. Generations are lost. But without American intervention, there's no decisive turning point, no overwhelming support arriving from across the ocean, no new resources, no new energy to break the deadlock. So the war drags on, longer than it should, deadlier than it was meant to be. And when it finally ends, it doesn't end with clarity. It ends with exhaustion, with fragile agreements, with unresolved tensions still burning beneath the surface. And that creates the perfect conditions for something even worse. Because without a strong global power to stabilize the aftermath, the world doesn't recover properly. Economies remain weak. Political systems remain unstable. Anger continues to grow. And out of that instability, a second, even more devastating conflict begins. World War II. But this time, the absence of the United States changes everything. There is no massive industrial force producing weapons at an unmatched scale. No economic giant supporting allies with endless resources. No unified military power capable of launching decisive operations. And most importantly, there is no D-Day. No massive invasion to reclaim Europe. No moment where the tide suddenly turns. Instead, the war becomes longer, more uncertain, more dangerous. Battles stretch on for years without resolution. Entire regions fall under control of powerful regimes, and without a force strong enough to push back effectively, the balance begins to shift. In some parts of the world, the outcome becomes darker, more controlled, more oppressive. Because without intervention, there is nothing to stop the expansion of power. And then there is one final difference, one that changes the course of history forever. There is no atomic bomb, because the project that led to its creation never happens the same way. Without the United States driving that level of scientific and military development, that weapon is never built in time. And without it, the war does not end suddenly. It continues, dragging the world deeper into destruction, for longer, with more loss, more suffering. And when it finally comes to an end, if it ends at all, the world that emerges is not the one we know. It is not balanced. It is not stable. It is not hopeful. It is fractured, divided, and far more uncertain. Because without a dominant power to rebuild and reshape the global order, there is no clear future, only a continuation of struggle. A world where conflict doesn't truly end, it only pauses. And everything that follows is built on that fragile, unstable foundation. Up until now, this story has been about nations, empires, wars, power. But this is where it becomes personal, because without the discovery of America, and without the rise of the United States, the world you live in today would not exist in the same way, not even close. Look around you. Everything you see, everything you use, everything you depend on is connected to a chain of progress that was shaped, accelerated, and often led by one nation. And in this timeline, that chain is broken. Because without the United States, there is no Silicon Valley, no global center of innovation driving technology forward at an unmatched speed, no companies pushing the boundaries of what's possible, no rapid development of computers, software, and digital systems that transformed the modern world. Technology still exists, but it evolves differently, more slowly, more scattered, without a central force pushing it forward. The Internet, if it exists at all, is not the same. It doesn't spread as quickly. It doesn't connect the entire world in the same way. It remains limited, fragmented, less powerful. And the device you're holding right now, the phone in your hand, may never have reached this level of advancement. Or it may not exist at all. Because innovation needs momentum. It needs competition. It needs massive investment and risk-taking. And without a dominant economic powerhouse, that momentum weakens. But it's not just technology, it's culture. Because in our world, the United States became the center of global culture. Movies, music, entertainment, stories that crossed borders and connected billions of people. Without it, there is no Hollywood, no global film industry shaping imagination on a massive scale, no shared cultural experiences that unite people across continents. Instead, the world becomes more divided, more regional. Different cultures grow, but they stay within their own boundaries. Less influence, less connection, less shared identity. And then there's something even deeper, something less visible, but far more important, the idea of possibility. Because in our world, people grow up believing that the future can be different, that innovation can change everything, that something new is always around the corner. But in this timeline, that belief is weaker, because progress itself is slower, less dramatic, less visible. The world doesn't transform as quickly. It evolves, but without leaps, without breakthroughs that redefine reality. And as a result, people begin to expect less from the future. They adapt to a world that changes slowly, a world where revolutionary ideas are rare, a world where the pace of life feels more predictable, more limited, and maybe even more controlled. Because when progress slows down, so does imagination. And when imagination fades, so does the belief that anything is possible. And without that belief, the world becomes a very different place, not just in how it looks, but in how it feels to live in it. Because the modern life you know, fast, connected, full of opportunity, is not guaranteed. It is the result of a very specific path in history, a path that, in this timeline, was never taken. And so, we arrive at the end of this timeline. A world where America was never discovered. A world that at first glance might not seem so different. There are still nations, still people, still history unfolding day by day. But underneath it all, something is missing. Something subtle. Something most people in that world would never even realize, because they have nothing to compare it to. No reference point, no alternative version of reality to question their own. To them, this is normal. This is how the world has always been. A world of slower progress, limited connection, fragmented cultures, uncertain futures. But from where you stand, from this timeline, you can see the difference. You can feel it. Because the world you live in today was shaped by moments that almost didn't happen. Moments that could have gone differently. Moments that could have failed. And if even one of them had, everything you know would be gone. No United States, no global superpower, no rapid technological revolution, no shared culture connecting billions of people, no version of history that led to this exact moment. And the most unsettling part, the people living in that alternate world would never know. They would never question it, never imagine that somewhere, in another version of reality, a completely different world once existed. A world of faster progress, greater connection, bigger possibilities. Because when something is never discovered, it isn't just lost, it's erased, not from history, but from awareness itself. And that raises a question that is far more real than it seems. How much of our world depends on moments we barely even notice? How many turning points in history came down to chance, a storm, a decision, a single moment of doubt? Because if one journey across the ocean could shape the entire future of humanity, then what else is holding our world together? And what would happen if it didn't? Because in the shadows of history, the truth is never as stable as it seems. And the world you know today is only one version of what could have been.